Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of...
The Super Data Brothers Super Show. Ryan, you're looking a little choppy there.
Yeah, we're having some connection issues over here, which is why we went live a little bit late. How's my audio?
Your audio's fine. It happens about, 5 seconds before your video does, so.
Well, that's not good. Okay, hold on. Let me... Well, we're just going to try to roll with it. If I have to drop to try to fix this, I will. But we're going to get started anyways today. Eric, why don't you tell the people what we got on tap for them?
Boy, do we have a show. All right, I'm so excited for today's show because we've got an awesome guest today, Scott Hireleman. Big data mesh guy, has a data mesh podcast we'll be talking about. We're talking about all things data mesh today. I know the clickbait thumbnail, maybe some of you click because of the clickbait thumbnail, is data mesh dead? And I think Scott will tell you that it is in fact not dead. So it should be a good show.
This is one of those things, it's popped up on a couple analysts. Gartner has an opinion on it. A couple other analysts have said, data mesh is done and that sort of thing. And I think, it's a little premature to be calling it as far as that goes. But we'll talk to Scott about it.
Isn't that the cycle? New idea comes. Everyone's talking about it. Some people realize that if you say it's dead, you can get a lot of clicks, like us on this video. And then it just goes from there. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly. That is the hype cycle, isn't it? Okay, so why don't we bring Scott on and just get things started here? Before we bring Scott on, folks, this is a live show. Okay, that means that everybody has more fun. We have more fun, and you have more fun if you get your comments, questions, reactions into the chat. Okay, let's pretend that this is Twitch and not LinkedIn. Is the way to approach this.
Left field newbie questions, we take those too.
Yeah,
or
anything.
Some people call them freshers. Give them fresher questions.
Haven't heard that one yet. But yes, if you have fresher, it seems like every other episode, someone's like, how do I break into the data industry? We're happy to take a question like that. Well, really, whatever it is that's on your mind. And of course, if you let us know where you're watching from, we will shout you out. Like our friend of the show, Paul Mendelson, watching from Israel. Good to see you here today, Paul. Okay. With that out of the way, let's bring Scott on and kick off. Is data mesh dead? Scott, welcome to the show.
Howdy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So we wanted to have you on for a lot of reasons. You're a cool dude, and also it's a timely topic because I think that there's, everything in our industry goes in these cycles, and something that'll be hot, and then it won't be hot, and then it'll be hot again, and so you're kind of one of the data mesh gurus, I would say, out there, or at least a hinge point in the data mesh community. And so we want to have you on to talk about it. What is data mesh? The state of data mesh? How are people doing with their data mesh implementations, and that sort of thing. So welcome to the show. And why don't we start by just saying, who is Scott Hireleman? Kind of what brought you to this point in your life that you've kind of become one of the data mesh people?
Yeah. So again, thanks for having me on. The who am I and my background thing can either go 30 seconds or it can go 30 minutes. So, what I'm doing now is focusing on helping people actually figure out what is data mesh right for them, and how that works, as well as having a podcast on this. How I got into it was literally a misinterpreted Slack message. I was seeing the term come up in late 2020 on Twitter, especially on Gwen Shapira's, who's famous from the Confluent days and now started her own company, Nile. But she was talking a lot about data mesh, and I asked somebody internally, I'm like, I'm seeing this. I trust Gwen. She's really excited about this. Do we have anything about this? There was somebody that was asking for information, and somebody just said, yeah, read up as much on this. We want to know as much about data mesh as we can. So you're now our data mesh expert. And I was like, okay. And I've got ADHD. So I went and I found, literally at that point, there were only about 70, 80 pieces of content. Most of them were by Zhamak herself. And, found a bunch of people that were doing it, but we're kind of doing it behind the scenes. And then just started a community. And me being me, I went and I found everybody who had commented about it or had posted about it or whatever. And we created this giant community. And then that was in early 2021. And then I got frustrated because nobody was creating content for practitioners. So I created a podcast around data mesh and like, what are people actually doing with this in late 2021? We're approaching 300 episodes now. I kind of went a little extra. At one point I was doing 3 or 4 episodes a week. That was way too much.
Oh, geez.
I don't mind recording that much. I could happily record 6, 7 episodes a week. It's just doing all the write-up and all the post editing. But like, why I got into it was this seemed like almost a no-brainer coming from outside the kind of data and analytics space of why aren't we using what works in software? Why aren't we using DevOps, CI/CD, just microservices approach? Why aren't we breaking this stuff down? It feels like we're making things far too complex and we're not focused on delivering business value versus delivering data. So probably too long, as you'll get with me. I talk and I talk, but I've got a insane background, stock analyst, VC, community marketing, recruiter, FP&A, all sorts of fun stuff. But what I try and do is help people connect to not the hype, right? And that's why Ryan and I started talking about this a little bit. Eric, I don't know you quite as well, but Ryan and I were talking in the background. We're seeing a bunch of posts that say data mesh is dead, or why aren't people sharing like their actual wins with this? And it's really tough. So like, I'm happy to share what I've learned, but also kind of put out there that it's really hard to talk about your success when you've transformed your entire company, right? Like that's the whole point of data mesh, and you're still in that transformation phase, right? Are you, we can talk about your swole gains, right? You're getting out there, you're working out, you're putting on the muscle. Maybe you're sharing some progress pics, but a lot of people are waiting until the end, and there isn't really an end with the transformation journey to share their progress pics. And we're not helping people. It's a terrible analogy. I'm putting myself way further and further down, but we're not telling people what progress pics we want. And so people can't share about that. So again, way too long, but I'm very excited to kind of talk about this because there is kind of a lull in the conversation around data mesh. And is that a bad thing? Right?
That's an interesting point too. Like there is oftentimes, I think, when you move to the implementation stage of a good idea, people are busy doing it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot less time to get out and talk about it because you're actually doing it, right? And I think we might be in that stage a little bit with data mesh. Before we kind of get into the, is it dead conversation, how would you summarize data mesh for someone who is just now encountering the idea?
So there's a really awful way to do this, and that it goes way down a rabbit hole. So I'll stay a little bit at the high level and not talk about how do you actually implement data mesh versus what is data mesh as a concept and what is it trying to achieve. So the idea, it's got 4 principles, and we can even go into those, but I tend to not talk about that. I tend to talk about companies at scale are having more and more difficulty remaining flexible and agile and, nimble relative to the market. And a lot of that is because they don't have the capability to reliably actually produce and rely on trust on their data, create high quality data for, AI, ML, analytics, whatever. And so companies aren't able to easily experiment in the market and quickly change relative to what's actually going on. So data mesh as a concept is about enabling companies to do that. Now, how you do that is by shifting the ownership of the data to the people who actually know about the data, to the lines of business that actually, create the data, shifting that to them, but also enabling them by doing that, by teaching them how to do this and, transforming the entire organization. But it's not just going in and smashing the monolith with a hammer. It's going through in an appropriate manner to let people manage data in chunks without it becoming, in delivering value chunks and managing data at a smaller scale instead of at that centralized team, but without it becoming super, super siloed, right? So that you've got that connective tissue, but you also have the ability to change things, which doesn't really happen that much with data. We don't remain flexible. We don't remain, we create a model in our data warehouse and nothing can change. And so, any change is a huge breaking change versus the real world is changing so quickly. How do we enable our organization to understand what's actually happening and react to that and take advantage of that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so then that leads to I think the next question. So say somebody says, that sounds cool. How do I buy it?
Yeah. And it's transformation, right? Like it's you can go and you can buy one of those costumes. Again, if we want to go back to swole games and things like that, you can buy one of those costumes with the big things, or you can buy the shirt that's got the fake abs on, or you can go and just get a pen and draw abs on yourself. It's not reality. And so, you're papering over, via spending that paper. You're papering over the actual problems instead of how do we as an organization do this scalably and reliably? And unfortunately, that's creating your meal plan. That's creating your thing. The reason I'm on this kind of kick is because I'm having some autoimmune things. So I'm having to do very specific things around meal and exercise and diet and all that stuff. But I think it works well as an analogy because you have to put in the work for this to actually happen. And it's not a vendor-driven thing. Unlike most kind of phenomenon in data, most ideas in data are a vendor-driven thing. And so then the vendors tell you, you buy from us and it magically creates this value. And data mesh has never been that. And, a lot of the people in the community have pushed back on anybody trying to say, buy us and you've got data mesh. And so that conversation is so different. Ryan, you do a great job of being at a vendor and not overselling and being we buy us and everything, all of your problems go away. But that's not the way most people talk. And most people get their information from vendors, and data mesh. You can't get your information from a vendor because they're going to have a skew, or you can't get your information only from a vendor. And that's frustrating because you've got people like me that will tell you it depends when you want just a simple answer.
Yeah.
Someone else will give you a simple answer. They'll just say it's behind the it's behind this paywall. Just pay us and we'll give you that.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you for the compliment, by the way. I try very hard to be at a vendor, but also, not make unreasonable claims and that sort of thing. Aaron Wilkerson says Scott Hireleman.
The vendor is good data, by the way. I'll shill for you, Ryan, since you don't want to.
Thank you.
I have no stake in the good data game.
Gooddata.com, folks. Aaron Wilkerson says Scott Hireleman is the data mesh weightlifter. So there you go. Maybe we should get data mesh swole gains shirts made or something like that.
Data gains. I don't know.
So got a couple questions flowing in already, and thank you for the questions. Like I said at the outset, you ask them, you get the questions in, and we will get them to Scott. So first of all, we've got again from Aaron Wilkerson. He asked, Ryan Daly, are you wearing a Carhartt shirt? So for those of you who don't know Aaron, he's the director of data governance at Carheart here in Detroit and a good friend of the show. Check our archive. We've had him on. He's an awesome dude. And yes, Aaron, it is a Carhartt shirt. So proud to represent for you there.
And I think I actually introduced the two of you too. And then
I believe you did, yeah.
Detroit. And then we're like, we get to go to the Lions games together. So
yes. Yeah. That's I think you did introduce us. Scott, you're really good at connecting people. That's one of your talents, I think. So Jens, kind of a long question, but we'll ask it. How do you see the concept of a data product? Jens often sees it interpreted only as like a data set with input-output ports. What about other formats of data products, like could a dimensional model be a data product? Could a cube or a report that has embedded business logic be a data product? And if you do see those, so it's a two-parter, right? Like, what is a data product? Could it be these other objects? And then the second part of the question is, if the answer to that is yes, does the data contract concept apply to those other forms too? Not, so this kind of, contextualize this a little bit for the audience. It's kind of generally recognized. People often talk about data products and they sort of mean a data set, and, that's addressable via APIs and maybe SQL is very common to see that referred to as a data product. The question is, can these other objects, a full-blown dimensional model or a report, be a data product?
So it's really funny because I'm tipping my hand early. So Tosh at Soda, don't come after me. If anybody knows Tosh, she's wonderful. But we're actually putting together a podcast. I'm exec producing it, so I'm not going to be on it. Nobody needs to hear more from me. Again, 300 episodes. But that around data product management in action, and we're going to talk to people that are data product managers. And what that can mean is product management in data. And so there's the concept of a data product in data mesh. And I actually call those something differently, right? I'd call those a mesh data product or a data mesh data product. For a while, I was trying to do that. Just like I sometimes talk about data product managers, which is just fun to say, right? Because they're specifically product managing a data product instead of a product manager in data. So I don't care what people call a product. I think you need to have an internal definition of that for people. But some people talk about, does the data product in data mesh extend out to the visualization layer? At Avinta, they're doing that, right? They love that. They love that concept. That ownership extends to there. Should a dashboard be a product? Yes, someone should own it if it's of value and you need somebody that's actually doing that. I don't care whether you call that a data product or not. So I think if you're talking about something specific to data mesh, it has a more specific definition, but not. And then I'm just not, I can't think of the word. I've been using the word zealous about it, but that's not the right word. But yeah, like I'm not super specific to kind of the tome of Zhamak, and even she's not. But when we think about a data contract, what are we trying to do, right? Are you trying to only create a thing around the schema? Then you're just doing a schema contract. Schema contracts exist. There's something from the Kafka world. I mentioned Gwen Shapira. Gwen Shapira has written a whole heck of a lot of things around schema contracts that evolved from API contracts and were very specific to schema. Data contracts are about ensuring people can actually know what they're getting, rely on it, and trust. So if there is an exchange of information and somebody owns it, there should be some kind of concept of a contract on it if you want that consumer to actually be able to trust it. So I'm all for data contracts. If you listen back, like I think it was episode 7, Olivier Volveric brought up the idea of a data schema contract. And I was like, what is this? And then I just started digging into it. And I called, 2022 as the year of the data contract. And everyone's like, you're weird. And that, half of the content out there was from me because I was so obsessed with this idea of how do we enable trust? It's so important, but we can't be super, super in love with the technological aspect. If you listen to Andrew Jones, he talks about feedback loops and like that's again, that product concept. It's not I post something and you use it or you don't. I don't care. You've got to have that connection. And anywhere we're exchanging information, if we want it to be reliable, yeah, you should consider putting a contract there. But like Ryan Collingwood, who I had on my podcast, he's down in Australia. He was talking about this concept of using data contracts as a non-tech company. And he's like, we just boiled it down to what matters, right? Like the central team is managing it, but we're just saying like, this is what you're going to get. And if there's a problem, I'm going to tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
I'd love to hear what you guys think on that too. It's not all about me.
Yeah. Oh no. So those of you who don't know, Scott and I have talked about this many times in many formats together. But yes, I do feel that like product thinking in general I came to data mesh, from BI, and I actually encountered product thinking for the first time when I suddenly found myself in charge of a very small dev team. I was at a consulting firm. We decided to build a small software product. They said, "Here, Ryan, you be in charge of this." I'm not a software engineer. I've never worked at a software firm. So I kind of had to really quickly figure out what the hell I was doing. And so part of that involved, reading books like the Lean Product Playbook and that sort of thing. And that talks a lot about product thinking concepts that I was like, well, why don't we apply this to business intelligence, right? Like, this is a great idea. And so obviously I'm going to say yes. Like, yeah, your dashboard can be a product. You can apply product thinking to a dashboard, and if you're going to do that, then you might want to consider, having a contract for it, especially, in BI, there's such a range of, like, I don't want to use the term useful, but maybe like how long something is going to live, right? And you build a lot in BI that is designed to answer a question today or this week, and maybe you don't need a contract for that, but those core customer-facing assets, it's very useful to have that. If you're going to have a dashboard that people are going to be using to make decisions over time, it'd be very useful to have a contract in place for it. We got a question from Paul here. So how much of data mesh is really a mindset change and about buy-in versus technology change?
It's a tough question to answer because it depends on where you are starting from. So I've talked about this, like, data mesh utopia land or something like this kind of analogy of, if you think about it, in a fantasy land, there was this previously blighted land, and then all of a sudden, a miracle existed, and now there's this land that everybody wants to get to, but everybody's starting from a different part on the map. So you've got, the dwarves in the mountains and the elves in the forest, and they might be coming from the same general direction, but the dwarves are going to go over and through the mountains, and the elves are going to skirt around those mountains and go through the forest. But, like, everybody starts from a completely different position. And so, Novo Nordisk, I had Jyotsna Karki on my podcast, and they were already pretty well decentralized. And so the mindset shift was simply like, this means we play well together. And so this is something that doesn't add a ton of overhead, but that we can actually play well better, and it's easier for the domains, the lines of businesses, to actually do what they need to do. Versus you have ones where they're very, very centralized teams and they're used to just ticket takers, or you have, very, very decentralized companies where everybody is competing with each other. That's going to take a huge mindset shift to be like, my data is valuable to somebody else in the organization. Of course, I don't want to share it with them, because then they're going to get ahead of me, instead of that rising tide lifting all ships. So, but it definitely is in conjunction with your technology. I do see some people that are just trying to do the mindset shift, and that doesn't work either. But, most people say it's 75% socio and 25% technical is kind of the split, because a ton of this is just getting people bought in and staying bought in and engaged that this matters, and finding ways to entice them to do this. Because so many people go into a line of business and go, you now have to give all of your data to the rest of the organization. That's data mesh. Aren't you happy that you now get to do all this extra work and give everybody your data, instead of going in and saying, like, hey, here's what we're trying to accomplish. Here's how we're going to reward you for sharing your data. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to rearrange, the work that you've got to do so that you actually can do this, and you can learn to do this. And we're going to give you the resources and the capabilities. So, everybody kind of hates asking me questions, because the answer is always, it depends. But it's definitely more mindset than it is technology, because a lot of times you can get started, people talk about their platform, we needed something that could transform data a bit and store it. Those are the only two things that we had for our initial data product. We picked a use case that only needed a little bit of transformation of data and storage, and to give people access. And that was our platform for our first data product. And we built from there. And so then mindset shift is the big thing that matters. But if people are already in that product thinking mindset, Spotify or H&M, they were on my podcast, Eric Haru a long time ago. I think it was episode 101, was talking about they had already done a big product, focus as a company. Everybody was dealing with the company internally. Everybody was, that product thinking. And so then just applying it to data wasn't a big mindset shift.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely goes organization by organization. And I think that leads in nicely to Lindsay's question. So Lindsay, friend of the show and former guest, Lindsay Murphy, asks, so at what stage does data mesh start to make sense for a company? Is it only really relevant or feasible for enterprise companies? Or would you think mid-market, or even should a startup consider this way of managing data?
So I think it's a difficult question, because it's like, how full bore data mesh do you go? I haven't seen anybody that's actually going like fully the theoretical thing of Zhamak, that they're fully, and even JP Morgan Chase, they said, we tried to give data ownership to some smaller domains, and the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. And so that's what is data mesh juice worth the squeeze. For me, when I've had on a lot of people to ask, like, what are the signals? It's like, we want to leverage data to actually win in the market. And we can no longer, our central team is killing us, right? Our central, there are decentralized ones that we can talk about from the enterprise standpoint, but typically it's, mid-market. If you're talking about that, is centralization of your data team becoming more and more and more of a backlog? And there's ways to measure that. So there are companies that are 500 people that are doing data mesh and having a ton of success, because they have a bunch of lines of business that are very complex around their data, and they're usually in the financial services space. But there are a lot of 10,000 person companies where, if data isn't a differentiator, why would you spend all this time and effort to make your company data driven if it's not going to change the way that you actually deliver value as a company, as you deliver? So I'm seeing a lot of scale ups, especially that are doing it. So when you think about startups, no, but when you think about scale ups, it's really a great niche for that, because they're quickly trying to get to a place and they need that data to outcompete. And so a lot of scale ups really do that. But Zhamak really conceptualized it for 10,000 plus people. We're seeing it work down into that 500 person range. But if you're a 200 person company and you really can't just be, I had Corinne Shlomo Goldenberg on from Panda, Big Panda, I think is the company. And so she was talking about, we just needed data. I just needed to create the capability of us getting data and understanding what the heck was going on. We didn't need to do this for the entire company. We didn't need, the central team wasn't the bottleneck. The central team wasn't a problem. It's that we just didn't do data well at all. And if you're just not doing data well at all, data mesh isn't going to help you. So you just kind of have to say, like, is this only for large enterprise? Probably for most points, unless data is a massive differentiator for you, like in the financial services space, or in certain very, very fast moving types of companies, it can be. But again, is the juice worth the squeeze, right? If you're a tire shop, right, you're not Goodyear. Goodyear is, or Michelin is doing data mesh. They're very big on that. But if you're just a regular tire shop and you're just selling tires, do you really need to be that data differentiated? Right? You're an in-store thing. Maybe if you're e-commerce and you're selling, many millions of dollars, but is it that big of a differentiator? That should be your thing. Does your business actually care? Is your business strategy going to change? Is it going to be driven if you're better at data?
Yeah, that tracks. I'm curious, you kind of mentioned financial services. Are there other industry verticals that you see this getting more purchase with than others? Like, what are the big ones?
It's funny because it's kind of pretty broad. Like the ones that everybody thinks of, like the FANGs, and those are the ones that do data well enough where they don't need data mesh, right? They're able to do this at scale, and they already are kind of decentralized, and they're doing it in an interesting approach. But it's financial services is very big, but travel, because they're dealing with so much data. Retail, especially ones that are kind of e-tail. So Zalando in Europe is a fashion retailer, and they're one of the kind of initial data mesh use cases. Streaming, like Disney Plus and NBC Universal and all of those are all doing data mesh. Netflix kind of is. Netflix is the most confusing one because they also have an internal project called data mesh. That's their like Flink at scale approach, and it's a centralized like platform that has nothing to do with like data mesh as a concept. And it's just a naming collision. It's nothing nefarious on their part. But you'll, if you say like, is it in this vertical, you'll see it there. Like travel, I just saw that like Schiphol Airport, here in the Netherlands, just put a big thing out on that. They put out a big use case on it. Like Adidas is big on it. Nike's been big on it. Like there's almost every space there is, but financial services are the ones that can get far more value from their data than just about anybody else. And so they're the ones, but even a lot of companies that you're going to think of as very traditional. Oh, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention biotech, life sciences, those types of companies. They're very huge because, if they can develop a new drug from doing better information or managing their information to do their FDA approvals better, that's a huge differentiator. But it's weirdly across the board, but I'd say it's much more financial services, especially in Europe. Any company that's over 500 to 1,000 people is heavily considering data mesh, but Europe, they go a little bit slower typically than US type companies.
Ain't that the truth? That's my experience too. So how would you describe then the state of data mesh in 2024? I feel like in 2020, 2021, 2022, it was kind of the hot topic, or one of the hottest topics in the data industry. We mentioned when we were talking earlier, I think before the show, how about the cycles everything goes through and where we are in the cycle of hype for data mesh. What's the state of data mesh currently?
So, yeah, I mean, the reason why we're even having this conversation was a couple of posts. Sanjeev Mohan had said data mesh in decline, and then kind of what he described was, this idea of centralizing or decentralizing everything isn't working, and so it's decentralizing what makes sense. But that's kind of been data mesh from the start. It's a common misinterpretation because Zhamak has called it decentralized data, but it's decentralizing the ownership and the architecture, not like the platform and the governance. Governance, you give people the local power when they need it and can actually leverage it, and that you create standards for everybody to use. But and Malcolm Hawker had asked the question of like, why aren't we seeing any success stories from data mesh? And so I think what we're seeing, part of it is I'll partially blame myself because I've been quite ill, and so I haven't been able to extract these success stories from people. But it's really hard to figure out how to sell these. So there's a heck of a lot of companies that are really starting to see success, that they're starting to see that knee in that curve, but they're not sure how to talk about it. And so I think we'll have a wave in the second half of the year. I think it'll continue to be a little quiet in this first half. Maybe Zhamak is kind of coming out of stealth somewhat with some of her stuff in the near future. So everyone keep an eye on Zhamak. I am an advisor to her company, so maybe I shouldn't be saying that. Maybe I am shilling when we gave Ryan daps for not shilling, but I think we'll see this big wave of figuring out how to talk about this in the second half of the year. But when I talk to these companies about their success with data mesh, they realize that data mesh isn't the point of their success story. it's highlighting, what the business has been able to do. It's that. And so, the data people are like, yeah, we're really successful, but the comms people don't want us talking about it. And we necessarily, you kind of mentioned it earlier, we want to be doing the work. We want to be delivering the value instead of, focusing on kind of out there and beating our chest and saying, look at us, look at us. And so I think we'll see a much bigger wave of success stories in the back half of the year. But I think I'm kind of glad for the Gen AI absolute BS hype and all this stuff, because it's made it so that there's something else that is kind of going on, and that I don't have to constantly be focusing on trying to constantly talk about stuff that doesn't matter instead of what does. And that's delivering value for your organization and learning how to do that at scale and, all of that.
Yeah. That reminds me of, because we talked with Matt Howley about data mesh briefly, because we had an interview with him last week on the show. And like his take was that like we'll stop using the term data mesh as if it's like a special thing, right? It'll just stop being like a thing. It'll just become like a standard, right? Kind of a thing people do. Because like in the 80s, everyone was talking about how cool SQL was, right? And everyone's like, are you adding SQL to whatever? Oh, Oracle's adding SQL, right? But then eventually everyone just started doing SQL, right? So that was kind of his take, and I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. So if you look at Zhamak, I love her, but she also needs to take a bit more credit sometimes. But she's multiple times on my podcast and stuff, when I've interviewed her, she's like, I'm not that smart. I'm not that smart. And it's like, yeah, you are. But she's like, I just took what was working in software and brought it to data. And if you look at microservices, for a while, we're still figuring out really how to do microservices really well at all sorts of scale. And data mesh is about bringing microservices aspects and DevOps, CI/CD, all this fun stuff over into data. And people very rarely talk about microservices as if it's the point. Data mesh should never have been the point. And Zhamak and I frustrated a lot of people, because there were a lot of people who were so excited about data mesh for the sake of data mesh, as if data mesh was this magic wand. And, we've been saying from the beginning, data mesh is, Zhamak has said this multiple times, data mesh doesn't solve all your problems. It creates new ones, right? Like it's exactly what you're talking about, of the conversation fades into the background because it doesn't matter, right? Like talking about data mesh as if it is the point, instead of it's a set of approaches for learning how to deliver value scalably and reliably with data to supercharge your organization and make it that you can do the, Sid Shah, Airtel, on the podcast was talking about, we went from 4 weeks of prep work and 3 weeks of an implementation for any experiment we did in the market to typically under a day, usually about 3 hours to get it into the market, and then 2-3 days of running it until we had good enough information to know, was this a successful or not experiment? And so it let them do much, much smaller experiments. It let them continuously experiment. It lets them do all sorts of things. Like, isn't that what we want? At that point, is data mesh really the point, or is interacting with the world as an organization and doing that quickly and being able to really do things no longer on gut, but that you're powering your operational change decisions, your operations with data, instead of just trying to only answer these big strategic questions. Your day-to-day work is powered by data. What happens when that happens? And are you still going to be talking about data mesh as the approach? Hopefully not, right? Like that just seems silly, right?
I think too, I've often wondered, Scott, so much of the conversation in data is vendor driven. I mean, it all is. Vendors drive the conversation. They really do. As someone who works at a vendor, that's the vendor marketing budgets drive the conversation in the data world. And I think that data mesh really came in a way, came into everybody's consciousness independent from that. And in some ways we don't have every once in a while, a good idea comes into the data world from somewhere else that isn't invented by a startup, a well-capitalized startup that's out there, repackaging ETL into ELT and building 18 new companies based on it and that sort of stuff. That's typically how the conversation in data is driven. And I feel like in the data world, we almost don't have a good way to even conceptualize or execute on things that don't come from that vendor-driven world. And I think data mesh ran into a little bit of that, where it was like, like I asked earlier, how do I buy one? Right? I mean, that's a joke, but it's also like that's the way we normally work in this industry. Is like some class of vendor convinces you have a need, and then you go out and you acquire one of the products in a lot of ways. And these products do fill real needs. I don't want to put it down too badly, but it's just something I think about is like how data mesh doesn't fit into that. It doesn't fit into the, oh yeah, you go to Oracle and they can bundle up a data mesh and give it to you for $8 million a year paradigm that we operate.
You're not moving your warehouse to the data mesh, the Oracle data mesh cloud, right?
Right.
Oracle was actually the first vendor to get anywhere close to data mesh. Very strange. They got it relatively well, but everybody was just like, no, we're not locking ourselves in with you. Yeah. Why would we do that? Yeah. but yeah, no. And I think a lot of this is the economics of data. So I had a Patreon for a while for my podcast, and I had one person that subscribed to it. Right. Yeah. And so we don't pay in data. We're so used to getting fed information from kind of these poisoned wells that when we're asked to pay for clean water, nobody's willing to put up for it, right? Mm-hmm. Or you have consultants that are only willing to share information behind closed doors and behind large checks. And I tried to disrupt that, and I got a lot of people trying to undermine me and throw shade at me and really do a lot of kind of nasty things because I was upsetting the apple cart, especially with how much VC funding was flowing into these companies. Maybe that could have changed if it were now versus 2 years ago, 3 years ago. But I don't know that there's a great economic, Joe Reese, I think, is doing a good job of creating a business around sharing this information more in the open, but even then it's a lot of times it's at conferences and it's those things, but like we don't have a funding model for this information to be out in the public. So then the only people who get the best information are the haves because they can pay for it. And I tried to upset that. I tried to disrupt that. And, some of it was just getting burnt out from dealing with people. But it's a really hard model. I wish we could have what Dama tries to be, but like that we actually had people really, really doing very, very specific, data contracts. I tried to get a group of people around data contracts. JGP is now doing that stuff with BTOL and that. But I tried to get a group around that, a working group around that. And there just wasn't infrastructure. So I would have had to create everything from scratch. And we don't have a good way to move stuff forward, to move ideas forward, unless it's funded, and companies aren't willing to fund it. And so they aren't willing to go outside of their models. They're still thinking of data as IT. They're still used to, going out and purchasing solutions instead of developing concepts themselves. Maybe that's just my view on it, but
no,
yeah.
You actually bring up what I think is a really interesting point, which is in the data world, like with the exception of maybe Joe, we don't have anyone who is making a career out of disseminating information that is not funded by the vendors. Like I can tell you, we have a YouTube channel. We make about $40 a month on YouTube.
Yeah.
And we've gotten, you can have a YouTube membership to the Super Data Brothers channel. Nobody has one. We've gotten 2 donations during live streams. And this is the type of thing, like, these are the types of things, if as a community, we were funding people like you, people like Joe, then we would I think we'd have a lot more vendor independent viewpoints out there. But, you know, if we accept a single sponsor, like a 1 episode sponsor on this show, which we have done, we have taken sponsorships for episodes, that we make more from that than we make from all the other work we do combined, you know, on the Super Data Brothers show.
Yeah.
And so it's just the funding model doesn't exist to get this information out to people independent of the vendors. The one exception I can think of is, well, I was going to say TDWI, but like they accept vendor sponsorships for the conferences. So everything is vendor funded in the industry.
Or training, but then training again is for only the haves.
Yeah, because so you have to. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, I think we were both basically saying the same thing of, we don't have this for the ones that are struggling the most. They're only the ones that that have the most funding, because, you know, and then we just continue to build into that haves versus have-nots. And it frustrates me, but you know, I'm kind of some people have called me a wild screaming socialist. And I'm like, nah, I'm just progressive in certain ways that I'd like nonprofits to be able to leverage their data to impact the world in a better way, rather than, you know, Google being able to, you know, use my data more effectively to sell it to, or Facebook selling my data to people more effectively when I never opted into them collecting it in the first place. Like, at the end of the day, I don't have, I would love to be able to say that I have a solution, but I mean, there's a real chance in the next year that I'll just go do something else rather than data, because I can't really make a great living from this when I'm trying to be independent and not trying to take money from vendors. You know, people are expecting me to take money from vendors. And so when I don't, they're like, that's admirable, but like everybody does. Right. So I'm just used to everybody kind of having an agenda, and therefore, like, great that you're independent, and I'm not willing to really compromise on that. So, you know, I might go work for a company that's in the data space, or I might just go and, you know, like I said, I've done all sorts of things. I might go back to doing FP&A or something like that. Like, because we're not thinking about, and this is kind of, it's tangential into the data mesh conversation of, we're doing data work for the sake of data. We're trying to learn how to do data work for the sake of doing data work instead of deliver value. And we're not rewarding actual value creation in data. Those aren't the sexy stories that everybody wants to hear about. They want to hear about doing the interesting, amazing data work instead of the value creation. And so, you know, again, am I on my soapbox? Probably. Am I way too preachy as per usual? Yeah, probably. But like, I feel so strongly coming from outside this space, coming into it and going, what are you all doing? Like, it's that thing from Community where Troy comes back with the pizza boxes and everything is on fire. And it's just like, what happened? I was going for, you know, like you come into it fresh, and it's like, you know, or the little dog of this is fine and everything's on fire. And it's just, why can't we change this space? I'm not going to take it on my shoulders anymore to try and do it.
Yeah, I think, so I think the lesson here, folks, is if you want better independent data voices, I think as a community, we need to step up and fund them, right? Like you had a Patreon, you know,
but it should be through your companies. It shouldn't only be on the individuals themselves. It should be that there's a funding model through the companies.
Yeah. Okay. We've got just a little bit of time left. Lindsay Murphy has been shooting excellent questions in here while we've been on this little rant, and so I'm gonna try to get him in. I don't know if you know Lindsay, Scott, but you should. She's awesome. You guys should connect on LinkedIn and talk.
Yeah.
Lindsay's great.
Lindsay,
Okay.
I've got a bunch of people for your podcast too, for your Women in Analytics podcast. So
Yeah, she's you should definitely talk. Yeah. Scott, Scott has a huge Rolodex. Pro tip, if you have a podcast and you would like to find a particular type of guest, Scott can help you out. All right. So knowing that data mesh is not a tool or something you can buy, but more of a concept, would you say that are there at least some tools or types of functionality, feature sets that are non-negotiable when it comes to the success of a data mesh? Like, what are the tech components you do need to have, or else you're going to fail?
This is really difficult. Well, I mean, one, I think if you're trying to do it on-prem, I've only heard of one company that's being successful on-prem, and that's Airtel. So and they're only on-prem because of regulatory requirements. So you need cloud. You need the ability to, I guess if you are on-prem, you need, a private cloud type thing, but you need the ability to scale up and scale down, because you need the ability to fail instead of, we've budgeted for this data product, therefore this data product must live. That's not the point of product thinking. Lindsay may be asking me to say a data catalog. I don't know that you need a data catalog tool versus you need a data catalog capability. I have my own thoughts on this. I'm kind of out in my own little world. I think you need transformation technologies, you need all of these things, but they're the underpinning of the platform, and what you expose to your users is not that. So do you use Snowflake, or do you use Spark, or do you use, Trino, or do you use, does it really matter? Not to the end users, they don't care, but you do need all the things that you'd think of in a platform. You need an ability for people to search and find data. You need an ability for people to request and get access to data. So there are a lot of tools that are necessary. You should not build everything yourself. That is insanity, right? But does it matter which tools? You need to think about what capabilities you need and when, right? At the very beginning, do you really need a lot of discoverability for your data mesh when you've got one data product? Everybody knows where the data product is. Do you really need to be able to discover that data product? Maybe because you need other people to figure out like what data is in it, what's useful. So again, I'm deflecting, it depends, but I'd say, cataloging, processing, storing, access granting, the ability to really think through your governance. But what tooling that is, it kind of, there's a whole lot of answers there. I know Lindsay, again, as a catalog company, I've had Ole and Bagnu is also talking a lot about the cataloging, but more than anything, you have to think about capabilities and then work back to what tools are going to give you those capabilities. I know too long of an answer, as per usual.
All right. That's then Lindsay makes the point, maybe many data teams get stuck in this centralized state or model and start facing issues without realizing that they may need to make a leap to data mesh to overcome the issues. Like there's a chasm that has to be crossed, and maybe most data teams don't actually get there. Would you say that there's any common threads or maybe a similar inflection point across organizations that causes them to say, oh, you know what, we need to make the jump to a data mesh?
So what I would say is, if you've got a monolithic approach, don't smash the monolith with a sledgehammer. Thin slice, think about transitioning some of your data team off into doing this, right? You don't all of a sudden go, and now we're decentralized. Yesterday we were centralized. What a lot of people are saying is the thing that creates we have to change is that we're adding more and more people to our data team, and our ticket backlog is still increasing. Our number of tickets handled per person is decreasing. Our number of tickets handled is staying flat despite adding people. That's just a very, very, very painful thing, because are you going to add 10x the people to be able to handle 2x the tickets? You get into this sublinear scaling of your central data function. That's where people really go, oh crap, we need to change. But a lot of times it's also people just saying, we're not using our data. We don't know what anybody else in the organization is doing. We can't combine our data across the organization. We don't know why we have these lines of business in the same organization, because we can't share data across those lines of business. Why do they exist in the same organization? There's no real reason for that if they can't cooperate in some way.
I think that leads nicely into Dan's question. So you mentioned kind of the common centralized data team metrics of like number of tickets, average ticket handling time, number of tickets per resource. Are there different measures of success after you move to a data mesh? Like, what are the metrics you're looking at once you have a data mesh to be able to try to quantify whether or not the data mesh is functioning properly?
And Dan may be trying to set me up to plug the book that got delayed because of me being quite ill again. I started writing a book on measuring data mesh success metrics. And then I realized I needed to write a book on data mesh success factors. So then you can talk about how you measure your success against those metrics. I think you want to think about value and momentum, and you want to think about those two things and measuring everything in that space, right? And you want to build momentum so you can continue to get funding, and you want to deliver value so that you can keep proving that you should get more money and that you should build more momentum and more people should come forward. Now, how each company defines momentum and success is different. At the very start, it's time to create a new data product. But then are you just trying to optimize for people creating new data products and you become a data product factory instead of thinking about value delivery? You think about usage and you think about value created. You'd go and you talk to your users, but a lot of it is just even the non-numbers based feedback of like, are people happy? Are they feeling successful with this? Are they doing that? And are they telling the stories internally? And so, what's valued is not always valuable, and what's valuable is not always valued. So you can be delivering a ton of value and it's not valued because people don't know about it. So a lot of it is like some people said the success of the data mesh community was by how many people were super annoyed by everybody talking about data mesh. Like, yeah, that's a thing. I didn't want the hype. I tried to stay away from that as much as possible. But a lot of that is just like, what are you actually making a bet on in your company? Is it that usage begets value? Is it that we need to focus on use cases? Is it that our regulatory risk is so high and yet we can leverage the data that we're preparing for the regulators, but it's that our regulators have stopped asking us questions? I had this when I was a cost manager for AWS for a public company. Their auditors came and talked to me and they lasted for 3 minutes. And they go, don't ever put me in a room with that guy again. I don't ever want to talk to him again. You're fine. We don't ever want to have that conversation. That is the most prepared person I've ever talked to. Right. And so that was success because our auditing bill went way down because, well, not maybe not way, but it went down because they were just like, we trust that this is good. We don't have to, the risk is gone. Right? Like, you are doing something right. But what does success mean for your organization is different. And so it's again, it depends, but a lot of it's that, how much value have you delivered? How happy are people? How many people are talking about this? How many people are coming to you as the data mesh team and saying, I want to be part of this because you've delivered value and that your data products are continuing to see increasing usage for the ones that exist, that are successful, and you're shutting off the ones that aren't. Again, way too long of an answer as per usual. That's my MO.
Nice, Aaron. In regards to measuring success, former President George W. Bush once said, "Is our children learning?"
I mean, data literacy is a great thing. Like, how embedded, some people have said how many of our decisions are driven by data, right? And do I want all of our company making a decision on what lunch we should order being driven by data? No. But if we can embed trying to leverage data to help make better decisions, small scale decisions, those add up. So it kind of is our children learning is a good one.
All right, so we started late. We've run a little over. Thank you everybody for tuning in. We've been a very active and awesome audience today, and a large one. This is probably the most live attendance, Scott, we've had in a while. So you really know how to draw the people in. I guess if you can just go for a couple more minutes. If someone is looking to get started with data mesh, what's kind of the first step they should take?
So I think you should go to the Data Mesh Learning Substack and go all the way to the bottom, because I wrote about this a long time ago. I would highly not recommend picking up Zhamak's book or one of her articles as your first things. They are brilliant. They are excellent. But Zhamak's first article is 6,500 words. Her second article is 6,500 words or thereabouts. Combined, it's 13,000 plus. And if anybody else wrote them, they would be about 30 to 35,000. They're that compact. Right? When you think about, if you want to get started learning about data mesh, I've got my podcast, so self-plug there, but there's a lot of really good content out there. And what I would say is, don't lock on to the first explanation. It's so easy to go down a bad path. If somebody said one little thing and it was just not the exact right approach. Like in my first episode of the podcast, I literally have 4 different ways that I describe how you could, 4 different analogies for data mesh, because it's a massive, massive concept. So start to ease in. And then if you want to actually get going, reach out to a lot of the folks, right? There's a lot of people that want to talk about this. And then, I really, really recommend some of Zhamak's old content, because she really told you what are the problems that she's trying to solve. And so there's another post on there on the Data Mesh Learning Substack from forever ago. And it said like all of Zhamak's content. And I said, I'm going to keep this up to date, and then didn't ever after that. But there's just a ton of stuff in there. And there's like a really great one if you search XCONF, XConf and data mesh. Her presentation there, I think, crystallized it so well for me as to like, what are we actually trying to accomplish? And then a little bit of how do we do it? And then you start to go talk to people. But I think that exchange of information with people is the crucial part, because otherwise you have to make, I had this with Mandeep Kaur on my podcast, my episode with her. We're talking about, you have about 10,000 decisions to make in data mesh. What are the ones that matter? And how do you not get bogged down on the ones that don't? Is really difficult. So like, if you want to get started, just start talking to some people and figure out kind of how they started their things. Go and reach out to the 200 plus guests I've had on my podcast and ask them how they got started. Some of them are consultants, so you might have to pay, but like, or reach out to me and if you want a briefing or something like that. But like, ease your way in and don't get locked into the understanding, because my understanding of data mesh has evolved every month since I started doing a podcast on it.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a great community. And, I think we, in a lot of ways, we owe you a lot of thanks, Scott, for helping kind of galvanize this community and bring it together. Your podcast has had so many awesome people on it, and the data mesh learning community you started. It's really been, I think you've had a huge positive impact. So thanks for all your work and passion in this area.
The reason why I did it was because I was like, data seems like it's totally broken, and there's way too many people that are working on something that's broken. So let's fix it. And, in first year, I was like, in 18 months, we'll have all of our answers. And then year 1 anniversary, I'm like, in 30 months, 36 months, we'll have all of our answers. Year 2 anniversary, in 48 months, we'll have all of our answers. So I've learned to not do that anymore. But like, the best way to learn is by exchanging information and just talking to each other, and not, again, no offense, not listening to the vendors. I maybe end up working for a vendor, but not just listening to the vendors. Go out there and talk to each other. It's not that hard to find the people. Like I said, a lot of people who've been on, they'll happily talk to most people, right? You just have to write a decent enough message to be like, hey, I want to pick your brain, but like, hey, we're really trying to head down this. We're trying to figure this out, blah, blah, blah. But like, there's a lot of people out there that want to help you do this successfully. Like, just go talk to them, find them.
Awesome. Well, I think we've gone almost 10 minutes over. So thank you for being so generous with your time, Scott, and thank you for sticking with us. Everybody who has stayed with us in the audience, Scott. If people want to connect with you, what's the best way to do it?
I generally LinkedIn. Just send me a connection request, and then please do not try and sell me services. That seems to be like about 40% of my connection requests right now, but yeah, I mean, that's easy. Or you can find me on the Data Mesh Learning Slack. You can just, if you just search Data Mesh Learning, literally, if you type at Data Mesh on LinkedIn, the top 3 things are all me. They're Data Mesh Learning, which I no longer own, but I started Data Mesh Radio, which is my podcast, and Data Mesh Understanding, which is my business. So like, I'm not very hard to find if you just do Scott and Data Mesh, but like, just reach out. I'm happy to kind of point you maybe to some resources or something like that. But a lot of this is just like, we need more people that are willing to share information with each other and to just dig into this without it making it so complex, because it's a very complex topic. So again, soapbox. I'll get off.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the time today, Scott. It's good talking to you as always, and I'm sure we'll be in touch soon. All right. Let's see. Eric, any final words for the people before we wrap it up today?
No, nothing really, except that we are the Super Data Brothers every Thursday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Well, most Thursdays. Say 0.85% of Thursdays. 85% of Thursdays. 0.85% of Thursdays would be like 1% of Thursdays. But anyway, yeah, or check us out on YouTube, youtube.com/Super Data Brothers, all that likes and subscribe stuff, all of that. And Ryan, do we have any interesting shows coming up next week or the week after?
So next week I'm going to be traveling I'll be in Prague doing a big product offsite with the product team at Good Data. I was thinking of maybe doing kind of like a live AMA or something like that for that episode. And then the week after that, we're going to be doing with Nicholas Kelly. Where are they? Where'd they go? We are going to be unboxing, doing a live unboxing, like we're Magic Card YouTubers or something like that, of Nicholas Kelly's data storytelling cards and his dashboard wireframe kit. So very excited to have these, do a live unboxing and see what's in them. And yeah, so make sure to tune in to that.
We'll get the data card equivalent of the Black Lotus.
Yeah, exactly. Did you see that they did a Lord of the Rings set and they only printed 1 card of the One Ring?
I did.
That's like nerd.
And then someone sold it to who's that, like rapper guy with like all the tattoos on his face and he looks like a dead squirrel kind of. What's his name?
I don't know. I'm too old to know that now.
Yeah, I don't know. I just know that he bought it for like $2 million off the guy. He bought the One Ring.
Amazing. All right. So that's what we have coming up on the show. And then if you want to meet me live, I will be at Data Council in Austin coming up at the end of March. And I will also be at the Gartner London conference in mid-May. So looking forward to meeting you at both of those conferences. And I think that's all we have for this week. I want to thank Scott again for being such a generous guest. Always, he's a cool dude. I love talking to him, and it was great to finally get him on the show.
Yeah.
All right. Good until next week then, folks, I am Ryan.
I am Eric.
And we are the Super Data Brothers. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.